Well, welcome everyone to my class that started a couple minutes ago, but I will continue on. Um, um, we were having a quick discussion about attachment and about that started about our friend Margaret Esterman, Mark Esterman, Conchi Roshi's wife, who just died on July 4th, and how painful it is, and how our attachments to things, and that sometimes that Buddhist students will think that we shouldn't have attachments at all, but realistically and really in the teachings, that it just teaches that we have freedom to attach, and that we should honor those attachments that we choose and be careful about which ones we choose. And so these teachings, like I say, shouldn't be taken to extremes, which often happens. And so I want to talk today about this idea of no self, which is a Buddhist teaching that's based on the realization of impermanence and the meaning of impermanence and the ramifications of impermanence and what that really means in day-to-day life. And it's very easy to sort of intellectually understand impermanence in terms that we can all see. We see that things live and die. We see that things manifest and then fade away. I guess my favorite example is there didn't used to be cell phones, and then all of a sudden there were cell phones, and we had these big giant cell phones, and then we had smaller and smaller ones, and ones that flipped open, and then all of a sudden smartphones came along, and there were no more of those. Well, there's still some around. There's no more of the old style cell phones, and where did they all go, and where did they all come from? They were made up of things from the earth, metal and plastic, and where did that come from? And they're all made up of other components, and those components finally are recycled, or they never leave the earth. Every cell phone that was ever made, every human that was ever born, the elements that they're made up are still here. They're just parts of other things now. And so shall we be parts of other things. Our bodies the water will go away, and the minerals and elements of our bodies will, even if we're cremated, it still doesn't leave the earth. The ashes are still around, and everything that was burned away goes up into the air. And so the universe is inherently impermanent. And at every level, in every possible way you can look at it, it's all impermanent. Now, when people start getting into that, sometimes they can say, well, I guess that means nothing matters. And that's really a wrong view of impermanence. You might actually take it to mean that actually everything matters, because we're here just for a short period, and everything we do has a karmic effect. And so it's very important that we take it seriously. So we can think of impermanence as something out there, something external. But in Zen, we like to look at things internally. We, look at ourselves. So we can take these great principles of impermanence and dependent arising, karma or cause and effect, and we have to apply them to ourselves and to our own lives. So if I look at impermanence, I can look at myself and I can think, okay, let me take myself apart here and see what I'm made up of, and why is it impermanent? Well, obviously I wasn't, I was born, And so I had to have parents, and they had to have parents, and they had to have parents, and they had to have parents, and on and on back to whenever life started. And even before that, because life came from things that we might not consider living necessarily, right? It sprang from something. Of course, many of the religions of the world will say, well, there's a God that created everything, and that's fine. Still, the same rule still applies. It had to be created from something, and so I realized that I have a life, a given life, and I don't know how long it's going to last, but I know that when I'm gone, there's everything that I was will carry on. It just won't be me, really, the way I think of me, like Bruce. All my karmic actions throughout my life are still bouncing around out there, and so is everyone else's. Those actions that came from thoughts and feelings, they're real in the sense that they have karmic consequences, and those consequences have further consequences, and on and on. And so everything is very much real, but impermanent. And so this is where the idea of no self comes from, because with an understanding of impermanence, you can see that everything is real, but nothing has its own particular identity. Okay, everything is made up of something else, and it comes together and manifests for a while as a cell phone, or me, or my family, or a bird, or a tree, and it finally goes back into the mix, and the mix produces all sorts of other phenomenon that we see, and those things are real, and they're real because we can touch and smell and taste them, and we can think about them and feel about them, and they affect us. And so this is where the idea of oneness comes from too. So no self just means that a tree, for example, we might call it a pine tree, but that's just a name that humans give it while it's there, or while there's a human thinking about it. And even if I say pine tree, that's just the English words for that, and other languages have other sounds that come out of people's mouths that mean pine tree to them. But if I say pine tree to somebody who who speaks Chinese, for example, they don't know what I'm talking about. So the pine tree doesn't come with a label. All the labels of everything and all the ways we identify everything are just names and labels that humans put on them. The universe doesn't come with any of that. It's just this huge thing that's churning around, manifesting objects, real objects. So it's a great, impermanence is a great thing for contemplation, but also meditation, where by sitting and sort of releasing and letting go of your ideas, and your ideas are just made up, right? They're just the creation of your mind to sort of organize things as we go through life, and that's fine, because we have to kind of organize ourselves through life. But we have to see underneath that and recognize that what we're making up is what we're making up, and that's as far as it goes. And so a tree doesn't have an abiding, permanent, fixed identity or self. And a person like me has no abiding, fixed, permanent self, permanent name, permanent existence, just a manifestation. I think in Buddhism and also in Hinduism, they say the world, the universe is like a dream, because everything just kind of comes and goes, comes and goes. So we don't want to take that kind of insight or realization to mean that nothing matters, because the other side of it is that these things are real and they do have effects and consequences. And so therefore we have a responsibility to manage that, our universe and ourselves, with wisdom and compassion, with the wisdom that the Buddha laid out for us about impermanence and about dependent arising and things, and with compassion that this is the world of samsara, where everything comes and goes, and everything we kind of make up about it that gives it a label, and after the label it becomes has some kind of value to us in some way or another, either good or bad. And depending on whether we judge that value to be good or bad or helpful or not helpful, then we accept or reject it. And that is the world of samsara. That is the world of suffering that the Buddha talked about. When he said life is suffering, he didn't just mean, my life is miserable or his life is miserable. He just meant that we are sort of blind to and confused by the true nature of the universe. And that if we can undo this confusion, if we can remove this veil that sort of blinds us to the underlying truth of it all, then that suffering may be reduced. It doesn't mean we won't drop a rock on our foot or make some really embarrassing statement or be humiliated by someone, or suffer the sort of pains of existence. But it means that the suffering that would be reduced is what we do after those things happen, where we start to blame ourselves or blame others, or we don't take proper action in the moment. The famous story about that is these fellows are walking along, and all of a sudden an arrow comes through the air and hits one of them, and he's on the ground with this arrow in him, and his friends are saying, "Lo, come on, we got to go to the doctor. Let's carry him to the doctor." He says, "No, I'm not moving until I find out where this arrow came from and why somebody shot it, and I'm going to get them for doing this to me," and blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, he dies, right? Because instead of just doing the proper thing in the moment, which is removing the arrow and putting pressure on the wound and saving him, he got more caught up in his head about the judgments and values and labels of that situation as he saw it. So this is what our Buddhist practice is for. So in the case of a loved one dying, like what's happening with Kanchi Roshi and his wife Margaret, or the story of the Zen master that I talked about, these are real occurrences. And so what is the proper thing to do in the moment? What is the most wise and compassionate thing to do in the moment? Well, for the Zen master who had lost his wife, the appropriate thing to do at the funeral was to have grief and to cry. And for the others, it was not to question why he was crying. It was for them to comfort him and to support him. Okay. And not try to teach him anything or try to tell him what to do. I know in the case with Mark, he and I, we talk pretty much every day, and he said, people have very good intentions, and they call and they write me And he said, but very many people will offer suggestions like, you should read this book now, or you should read that book now, or they'll tell the story of what happened to them and what they did. And, he said, I appreciate it because I know it's good intentions. And he said, but my grief is my grief, and I'm just going to go through it my way. And so sometimes even when we think we're being helpful, it doesn't necessarily accomplish what we hope. And so we need to think about what our impact on the world is, what our impact on others is. Try to remember that all the time. Knowing that I'm no self. I'm not a fixed object, which is good in a way, because then I have complete and utter freedom. Because when things aren't fixed, nothing can get stuck. But what gets stuck for us, of course, is our dualistic thinking and attaching to labels and values and judgments, and letting those things guide our actions, sometimes helpfully, sometimes not so, but usually without much awareness, really, of whether it's good and bad. Many times we'll react sort of quickly without thinking, right? Sometimes it takes a step back a little bit and, like I say, think about the impacts. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about no self. And I would encourage you to take up the examination of impermanence and start to notice it, like all the time. We oftentimes go through the world kind of busy in our heads, about, okay, what do I have to do next? And thinking about the news or things that's going on, and we sort of miss what's right in front of us. And so sometimes, for me anyway, I do meditation, but I also do a kind of contemplation where I'll just catch myself wherever I am, at the store or driving my car or sitting in my yard or whatever, even talking with my wife, and I'll just suddenly tell myself, this is all impermanent. How is that? And just kind of just recognize it in a way, that the words I'm hearing are gone in an instant, and the words I'm saying are gone in an instant, but the effects maybe travel on. Maybe it's not so far, maybe very far. But to start to just take notice, take note of the world around. And, if you see a tree or a bird or something, or a sunset or whatever, or the dishes when you're washing them, just to wake up for a second and just go, okay, impermanence in this situation. What is it, And it'll slowly sink in more and more. And I think it's a good practice. Sam, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I really appreciate this talking about impermanence. I was working with Mary Ellen the other day. We were talking about the non-seeking mind. And I said, I'm not sure how I can get into these voices or anything like that yet, but it's just as you were saying for me, as you're contemplating your experience. I notice all that I'm kind of caught up in, or I notice my thinking mind, or the thing about wanting to give advice. I don't know if I'd be quite like that to Mark, but I can certainly feel, oh, we come from that place, or we do this or that.
Yeah.
But it's moments when I can notice this voice of the non-seeking mind, and I can go, okay, I am that voice for just a moment. Mm-hmm. And I can notice all of my clinging and craving and grasping and all of that, and notice from an outside vantage point, as I am this non-seeking mind, about all the kind of activity that this small self does. And it's not like I might stay in that for some time, but it's something to where, like today, with what Mark's going through, really making me contemplate, do I want to be the guy who here I'm going to give advice, or do I want to do my typical thing, or noticed what a small self can do that is not so useful. And I can't, it's something where I can't try to just be the non-seeking mind or go to the transcendent, but I can just notice when I am the seeking mind in the moment and try to own and embody that. And noticing the impermanence, because if I try to do it, it just feels like an impossible task. But it's something when I'm up against this, and I don't know how I get emotional. I didn't know Margaret too well, and with Mark and everything, but you're talking about impermanence today is really helping me to work with what comes up and to approach it from the most mature and wise place that I can.
Yeah.
So I don't know if necessarily have anything to say about that, but it's just interesting how, I can't snap my fingers and come from non-seeking or, oh, I've got that voice. But when I am that, it's useful to notice that and to notice just, I don't know, I'm going through how silly my small self is. And I don't know if anybody else is going through that, but what a great teaching.
Yeah.
Well,
Sam, you know me, and I've always got something to say about everything. So,
I love it.
so I will say a couple things about that. One is that the key thing that you mentioned, and Big Mind is a great practice for, kind of falling into these voices to give you sort of a glimpse of things. But I think the key thing in the practice is, we always talk about awareness or mindfulness. And what awareness really is that moment when you catch yourself and you shift yourself to just observing what's in front of you, kind of, or you catch yourself thinking a certain way or doing something, and you suddenly have a way to step back and see it kind of as an object, right? It's something other than you. And so being able to trigger that awareness is something that's just a practice technique of just like, I don't know. For me, sometimes I'll just sit there and for some reason or other, I'll just go, okay. I'll just look around. I just say okay to myself, and so that's a great practice. And the practice is just sort of waking up to just all kinds of little things all the time till it just becomes a habit. The second part of this, though, that's even more profound and more, I wouldn't say important, but the second part of that is then to say, okay, who is it that is noticing? Who is it that it just woke up to this? What is it that just did this? And that will take you very deep inside. And that's also something that becomes a bit of a habit if you work on it. So the first thing is, like you say, Sam, you'll be, and you can do this with a voice. You can say, oh, I need to, first of all, you wake up to the fact that maybe I need to go sit in the non-seeking mind for a moment. Okay. And you do that. And then you have to say, who just woke up to needing or wanting to be in non-seeking mind for a moment? Okay. Do you get what I'm saying?
I think so.
Okay. This is in Zen when they say turn the light inward. Or Suzuki Roshi famously would say, take the backward step.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's useful to just remember those phrases even. The Tibetans say, remember to remember to remember. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't talk about remember to remember to remember some event. They're talking about remember to remember to remember to snap yourself out of wherever you are in that moment. If you're sort of buried in thought or you're buried in emotion or you're buried in anything, and take that backward step, like Suzuki Roshi says, take a step backward, and all of a sudden that whatever it is not you, it's something you're observing. Okay.
I really do feel that taking a step back from my body right now. You know,
Yeah.
with Mark and with Margaret, you know, she was a Rinpoche and Mark is a Roshi. And
Yeah.
it's just it's interesting all the kind of stuff that goes on for me when I heard that she passed and things. Um, but it's you know, maybe even inappropriate for me to share so much just because there's a notion to where I'm buried in my emotion, as you say, or whatever it is. And when I take that step back, you know, I just notice, oh, my body's just doing all this stuff. And it kind of seems silly when I get to a higher vantage point. But for some reason, this whole thing is pushing me to get to that higher vantage point where it's just as you say about remembering and remembering and remembering.
Yeah.
And your words really help me to kind of remind myself, well, I'm stuck in a tiny part of who I really am. And it's
Mm.
not so much about getting to the expanded part of who I really am, but just being a clearer vessel for what wants to happen right now with us and with everything. But I've never found it possible before. And so today I'm kind of having a breakthrough in finding that it's possible. And I just really appreciate your words and being here together and this opportunity that I have to, for the first time, kind of notice my emotion and then be able to step back from it and say what's most useful. I didn't
Yeah.
even think I had that ability at all. Like, you know, so
We don't.
that's huge for me. I really appreciate that.
We
And
don't really have that ability in a way. I mean, we have the ability always, but we just don't know how to do it or use it or even know that it might be important. And so by taking that backward step, you know, you've separated this subject and object, right? So the thing that you're observing is the object. And then, like I say, the second part of it is what is the subject? What woke up, what is seeing, what is, you know, that's where it goes inward. So you take the backward step and then you focus on what it is that's seeing, what you're seeing.
well,
Thanks,
it's like
Sam.
taking a step. It's like taking a step off 100-foot pole. You know, I can't go to Mark or I can't go to you and say, "Here's this koan. Here's how I'm doing. How am I doing?" I just have to do that, and then okay, who cares if I pass a koan or not? It just has to be done. You know, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you. I'll get off. Maybe there's some other people who want to talk, but I really appreciate it today.
Gloria's got her hand up. Gloria?
Yes, it's about this backwards step. Isn't it a gap? Taking a gap? Isn't it the opposite of the what we are looking in Zen? We want to be one with, and taking a step back, it's the opposite. It's looking for this gap. No.
Yeah, I see your point. And this is one of the, you know, these are practices for different types of things. And they all sort of lead to the same spot. But and of course there is the practice of sitting there and seeing everything as one, that I am one, everything is one. And that's, you know, the study of impermanence will bring you there for sure, because when you see that everything is made up of all the same stuff, we're all made up of all the same stuff, just manifested in different shapes and colors and things, you know, you do see that oneness. The practice I'm talking about is and that's it. So this is and actually in the Three Pillars of Zen, Yasutani Roshi talks about this, you know, outward meditation and inward meditation. And I don't have it handy, or I'd read it to you, but maybe next week. Well, actually, I should tell you now that I'm not going to have the class next Saturday. I have some other business to take care of that day, and I can't find anybody to sub for me yet. But we'll let you know. But so outward meditation is this sort of, in a way, it's stepping back. It's stepping back and observing the world as one, and you forget the self, and so there's no. So you're not separate, even though you're stepping back and observing outwardly you drop the self, and so then that feeling of oneness, you might say, comes on board, or is experienced. So part of the difficulty in Zen and these things like this that we're talking about is the language, in a way. And so this is why we have so many hundreds and hundreds of sutras and books and everything else, because everyone is trying to express these things, you know, in a new way, or a way that will work for someone. And so I would say, Gloria, that taking the backward step is not removing yourself from the world. In a way, it's like big mind, where you go into a voice, you experience that voice, and everything else is everything else. Like when Roshi asks us to say, well, okay, what does the self think about you, and what do you think about the self? You know, does the self like you or not like you, and appreciate, you know, it's the same thing. We sometimes will split things apart in order to put them back together. And so I think we're both saying kind of the same thing. And what Suzuki Roshi said was, you know, it's a practice for not stepping back from the world, really, but stepping back from whatever you're caught up in, whatever you're stuck in, is to separate for a moment, see that stuckness, and sort of let it dissolve or realize its impermanence. And then, but the second part of it, I think, is the most important, and maybe what you're alluding to, Gloria, is when you then turn that back on yourself. That's you won't. The same thing happens. You realize there's no self, and so how could what is it that's looking at itself? You know, can the eye turn around and see itself? Well, in Buddhism we say it can, but how? What's that? What is that? And how could that be possible? So these are the sort of esoteric and mysterious kind of parts of our practice that really cannot be explained in any way that makes sense. It has to be experienced, but we can point to it. We can say, try to do this, you know, try to do this and see where it takes you. And this is exactly what the Buddha instructed. Now, things like the Eightfold Path that the Buddha laid out, or the 6 paramitas, or the precepts, all those kind of things were laid out to help people prepare the ground to be able to do this most critical part, which is to be able to see my true and original self. And can I see it by making it an object? No. I have to accept the blendedness of it. And yet we want to be, we are prone to feeling separate all the time. But if we exercise that separateness back and forth enough, suddenly you can break through that. Does that make sense? I'm struggling here a little bit. Yeah. So they're all exercises, they're all upayas, they're practices, they're things to do. You know, I had an experience when I was like 14 years old that may give an idea of this. And I wasn't, you know, I was raised in the Church of England, Episcopal Church, they call it here. And, you know, I was kind of interested in those things. But when I was 14 one time, and I was at a school dance, and I kind of sat down in the corner, and for some reason or other, in my head, I saw myself thinking. And it was like, before that, I was just thinking, but suddenly I saw myself thinking. And then I said to myself, who said that? And then I said, who said that? And then I said, who said that? Who said that? Who said that? And it just like was like, you know how when you put two mirrors together, it seems like you can see like to infinity that way. It just went whoop, like that. And I know now that that was this experience of seeing into myself. Now I was 14. I didn't, to me, I thought, did somebody put something in my punch, you know? Or, I mean, but it really shook me. And of course I remember to this day. And it changed me a lot right then. But I didn't, you know, there was no Buddhists around or anything like that. I didn't know what to think of it. I just kind of remembered it always as an experience. But as I got older and started studying some of these things, I went, oh my gosh, this just happened kind of out of the blue, out of just naturally, you know. And it does happen to people out of the blue and naturally. Not everyone has to do any kind of practices or anything. You can suddenly have this kind of experience, and oftentimes people will tell me, gosh, you know, sometimes when I go on a hike and I'm by myself and I just sort of forget about myself and I sort of lose myself, you know, I do see I did, you know, they'll tell me at a certain time, they remember it, I saw everything as one, you know, suddenly, because I was so relaxed that I just let go of myself. And then what's left? Well, what's left is oneness. But it's not something you can force to happen. But many people have had these kind of experiences. And I think in the West, the problem is that people don't know what to do with it. They don't know what it is. They don't, you know, sometimes it maybe is a little scary when they snap out of it. You know, they think, well, I just kind of went crazy for a minute or something. We aren't brought up to even consider these kinds of things. And I'll tell you another thing that happened to me. I made really good friends with one of the priests at the church that we went to all the time, a younger guy, and we would have these discussions. Actually, this was after that thing I just told you about, who said that. And he said, you know, we are the body of God. And I said, and at first I said, I thought to myself, oh, you know, like, yeah, we're the congregation of God, you know, the body that way. And I kind of looked at him quizzically. He says, no, the actual body of God. Just like your kidney is part of your body, you know, you're a part of the body of God. And this was a Christian understanding of a great and profound oneness sort of thing, right? That everything is one, and you could call it God if you want. And, you know, but I got his point, and I remember that too. So we pick up things along the way, you know, bits and pieces and things. And so examine, you know, your life for these things. You know, you've probably had these kinds of things even way before you were a Buddhist, as a small child or as a teenager or whatever. And you can start to piece together, you know, your spiritual history in a way. And I think it's important because, you know, part of remember is to remember to be aware, and remember to open yourself, you know, to these grand truths of the universe that the Buddha and others have laid out. And I think that if you have that kind of mindset, you can go through just about any major spiritual literature, and you can sort of understand where they got these things too. because I think it's such a fact of the universe that it's just expressed in all sorts of different religions, different ways. Now, religions can go all kinds of different directions as far as their organizations and their power structure and, you know, all these kind of things. But to try to get to the root of it, you know, it's even like getting to the root of Jesus's teachings, the real root of it. You know, why would he do these things? Why did he, you know, where was he at that this was even a consideration for him, you know? And the same with others. Because, you know, like we say, you know, you're already a Buddha, you just don't know it. Right. And this is why, because everything's impermanent, everything's one, it's all just manifestations, and you are that, and everything is perfect as it is. And, you know, we're just confused, right? We just have this veil that is, you know, part of being human. And it's a challenge, you know, that the universe has put before us to penetrate that and to evolve. We're not trying to devolve. We're not trying to go back and experience the world the way a moose or a fox or a kangaroo, in your case, yeah, sees it, right? That's going backwards. We are going forwards, and we need to look forward, and we need to see that this gift of this, in a way, gift of dualistic thinking is also the next barrier, the next challenge that as a species we need to break through, and not to throw it away, but to transcend it and include it. It's like Ken Wilber says, we need to transcend. We don't throw away our dualistic thinking, we transcend it so it's included as well. And to me, that's our practice. I think that's all I have for today. If anyone has a question or comment, I'd be happy to hang on. But if not, that's okay too. Tenkei Roshi used to say, he goes, it's okay to have a question, it's okay not to have a question. I love that guy. Do you know him, Gloria? Tenkei Roshi in Holland.
Does he have another name?
Anton Coppens is how
No.
he is a successor of Genpo Roshi's, his second or third successor, I think. And he taught at Kanzeon Zen Center and lived there in the monastery, and was there when I arrived. And he was very much of an inspiration for me. And, you know, Genpo Roshi he's always like working with his more senior students, you know, and I showed up as this new guy. I didn't know much of anything, but Tenkei Roshi, being an assistant teacher, you know, was so kind to me and would invite me for lunch and things like that outside of the normal schedule, and kind of mentor and nurture me, and I forever appreciate it. And he has a very nice Zen center in northern part of Netherlands, called Zen River. And you can go on their website.
Yes.
And his wife Tammy is wonderful and very down to earth. You know, those two kind of taught me that Zen didn't need to be so formal in a way. Because it was very formal, the practice, you know, when I got there. I mean, it was a very rigid schedule. Everybody had their duties, and, you know, you had to be there on time and everything. But you know, when I had these lunches or little breaks where I could talk to Tenke Roshi or his wife Tammy, you know, they were just like regular people and made me feel a little bit more comfortable and secure. But I remember one time I was in one of the buildings we had, you know, I was roommate with another person there, and I was on cleanup duty or something like that, and I was able to skip the next session. So I was out there puttering around, and Tammy was in her room that she shared with her husband, Tenke Anton. And she looks at me and she looks at her watch and she goes, "Bloody hell, I'm late." And she goes running out of the room and grabs her robes and, you know, all this stuff. And I just thought, okay, that's real. And we laughed about it later. So.
Is
So we
he
don't
the
have to
teacher of pardon?
Oh, I was
Is
just,
he
saying,
the
just trying to move forward and transcend. Go ahead, Gloria.
is he the teacher of the in the Zen Center, the one who gave transmission to some women? Is he the one?
He's one of them. Yeah, he has. And also Nico, who's in Amsterdam,
Yeah,
has given
I think it was
transmission to
Nico. Yeah.
a number of women. They all know each other really well up there in Holland. And yeah, you know, on our website, there's a very interesting little database on there called the Student Dharma Records.
Uh-huh.
And if you go there, it's you can scroll through and you can sort by all the different categories. And it
Okay.
gives someone's name and their Dharma name and the English translation of their Dharma name and the date and location where they did Jukai and Shuke Tokudo and
Uh-huh.
and all the different ceremonies, and you can see the whole history of Genpo Roshi's lineage by just kind of scrolling around and sorting things by date or by alphabet. And so if you sort on the Shiho date, then you can see all of Genpo Roshi's successors right in a row there, and the dates that they became senseis and things like that. It's kind of interesting.
Good.
But they'll be in there. But yeah, I highly recommend, you know, if you ever want to do a retreat in the Netherlands, to get a hold of Zen River. They have them all the time. They're really wonderful people and very accomplished.
Mhm. Is he maybe the teacher of Peter, a Zen teacher here in the Pyrenees, here in the north of Catalonia?
Peter, yeah, I know who you're talking about. He may be, I'm not quite sure.
Mhm.
I think on the Zen River site too, they have you know, listings of everybody and where they are.
Have a look.
Peter, it starts with an M, I think, doesn't it? Peter,
I don't remember what else.
I can't either. That's why we have databases, because I can't remember it. So,
Thank you.
all right. Well, so nice to see you. And I know it's summertime, so less people come in the summer, but it's really nice to see you, and thank you for coming. And I'll keep you informed about next week. I may or may not be able to do it. So, okay.
That's okay.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I can teach the class if everyone wants.
Okay, Sam. I'll give you. All right. Bye.
Oh, that brought a little smile to